And today we're looking at a rather interesting, almost superficial, but at the same time really substantive story, which I'm sort of describing as Facebook versus politics. And it kind of reflects how Facebook has been facing increasing pressure to take responsibility for their political power and their political influence. And the irony here is that as a society, we can sort of all recognize that Facebook plays an outsized role in our politics, but we still disagree as to the nature of that role, in part because Facebook is still in denial. Facebook still does not recognize the power that they have and instead sort of still regard themselves as a mythological neutral party, as if they're just a platform enabling other political actors to engage in political activity, but not Facebook. No, they themselves are neutral. Now, of course, we here at MetaViews, we think that's rubbish, that we recognize that Facebook is itself perhaps the most dominant political actor based on the premise that the medium is the message. And so I think it's quite interesting that Facebook has come up with this decision to basically try to minimize, or in my language, suppress political activity on their platform. And I think that's going to have quite an impact moving forward. And so, the nature of this story is Facebook is really responding, not just to the US election, but for example, the recent coup in Myanmar, to protests in India, and to political activity and political elections around the world. So they announced yesterday, Wednesday, that it had started changing its algorithms to reduce political content in users' news feeds. The less political feed will be tested on a fraction of users in Canada, Brazil, and Indonesia, and then will be expanded to the United States in coming weeks and to the rest of the world. And the idea I think that Facebook is trying to experiment is whether your relationship with the algorithm can reflect your political desires. And here, because their algorithm is a black box, it's not entirely clear as to how much choice or how much agency people will have. But the idea is that Facebook wants to make politics opt-in. That rather than sort of spoon feed people propaganda, inflammatory political content, that you'll have to put in effort to find that content, that you'll have to put in effort to be an activist on Facebook. Now, I'm hypothesizing when I say that because it's not at all clear that that's the case, right? It's certainly quite possible that instead what we'll see is Facebook try to basically sweep politics under the rug. Try to return Facebook to being a more personal or family or a kind of apolitical social network, which I'm not sure is possible. I think there's a lot of people who've been politicized on Facebook and turned to Facebook as a political arena, and they may just feel that their speech is being suppressed. They may feel that their desire to express themselves politically is now being punished by the algorithm. And that may push them to other platforms, or it may push them to become even more politicized and even more bombastic when it comes to expressing their politics. And, interestingly enough, Jason Kint, who is a Facebook critic that we follow on Twitter, he pointed out that Facebook continues to fail in its attempts to set the narrative for scrutiny of its platform in any given week. This week it's proactive reduction in political content. Last year it was free expression. And until they wrestle their underlying toxic micro-targeting platform, nothing will work. And Jason's argument here is the problem is not how people use Facebook on a user level. The problem is how people use Facebook on an advertising level. That it's the ability for political groups or conspiracy groups to use micro-targeted advertising to create these polarized effects, to really inflame conspiracy theory and incentivize people to lie, to incentivize people to take all sorts of really radical actions. And so the question is not, should you punish users? The issue is much more that it's the advertising and the advertising technology behind it. So this is where I want to reference an earlier tweet from Jason where he breaks down the ad technology that exists, not just on Facebook, but on social media as a whole. And it speaks to a technology infrastructure, a surveillance infrastructure that really facilitates the way in which we think of social media. And I think that's an important point, that this isn't about the politics that we see on the surface of Facebook. This is about the medium of Facebook and the political power that Facebook has in terms of their micro-targeting. And this is where I want to bring in another interesting perspective, which is Cory Doctorow, who has been promoting his book a lot lately. And he talks about how technology and politics are inseparable. And in particular, here's an argument from this interview. There's a kind of nerd determinism that denies politics. Our superior technology makes your inferior laws irrelevant. But just as pernicious is the inverse, the politicos who insist that technology is irrelevant to struggle, sneering about clicktivism and solutionism. Now, Cory's logged innumerable hours wheat pasting posters for demonstrations to telephone poles, and he can't believe that anyone who claims network computers don't change how politics work, or who have ever wheat pasted a single handbill. And it's the idea that all speech is political, right? That everything we do online is political. If you choose to use Facebook, that's a political act. So when Facebook tries to suppress political activity, when Facebook tells its users, no, we don't want to hear about your politics anymore, we just want your cat photos, well, that in and of itself is a political act. And it's why I think it's important when we think about how we use politics and the way we use politics that you can't separate that from technology in general. And, our friend Nuvayak pointed out that it's part of why people have been migrating away from WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook. Part of that is security concerns. Part of that is surveillance concerns. But it also reflects the reality that your speech is political. Your ability to express yourself politically online depends upon the platform that's used.